Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, many of you are well aware by now that the film Oppenheimer is out. I haven't seen it yet, hopefully going this weekend. As soon as I see it, you will definitely get a video from me talking about what I thought of it. So that's coming soon. In the meantime, though, we're going to go ahead and go back to our friends at the Operations Room who do a phenomenal job with historic events and animating them and helping us to see visually what certain things look like. So we're going to take a look at their video today on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which happened right around this time of year in 1945. It was the first and second weeks of August when all that went down. This is not a video meant to debate the validity of dropping the bombs, whether they were necessary, those kinds of things. That'll be for another time. This is really just telling the story of what happened. Link is in the description. Highly recommend their channel. One of the best channels on this platform when it comes to visually representing and giving facts about things that happened, whether it's a small battle or big strategy things, stuff like that. We've done a number of their videos, and I'll put some links down in the description to some of the other reactions I've done to some of their content. But let's go ahead and dive into this one.
This video is sponsored by CuriosityStream, but more on that later. 3 B-29 superfortresses of the 509th Composite Group lift off from the island of Tinian at 2:45 am. The three aircraft begin a long 6-hour journey towards the Japanese home islands. The mood is
So, immediately we don't really think about what a long journey this was, right? The whole purpose of the strategy for the U.S. Navy and Army and Marines the Marines are part of the Navy, but in the Pacific is this idea of island hopping, right? Getting closer and closer to the home islands of Japan in order to be able to launch bombers, in order to be able to try and reduce their ability to make war and eventually, if necessary, land on the home islands themselves. So Tinian's 6 hours away, though, and these B-29s are specifically designed to be able to make these long flights. And if you want to see exactly what Tinian looks like, my friend JD over the History Underground actually got to visit Tinian and showed the actual runways where this took place.
Tense aboard Colonel Paul Tibbets' aircraft, named the Enola Gay after his mother. The date is the 6th of August 1945, and the Enola Gay is carrying an atomic bomb, a weapon that will change the world forever.
Notice what they don't have. There's no fighter cover for this, right? Fighters don't have the range to be able to do this anyway. It's part of why these B-29s were designed, is that they have the long range, but they also have the capability to be so high in the sky that they're just really difficult to get at in time. But also this shows the state of the Japanese defenses at this point. You can't hit them from the ground with anti-aircraft fire because they're just too high for that. And Japan just doesn't have the capabilities to be able to launch fighter defense against these B-29 attacks.
8 years after Japan launched its unprovoked invasion of China in 1937, the Pacific Theatre has raged on. Despite the deaths of tens of millions in what is now the Second World War, the end of the conflict doesn't appear to be near. Japan's empire has been slowly whittled away by the combined might of the Allied powers, but she refuses to surrender even in the face of certain defeat. At the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Japanese forces are hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned, yet fight nearly to the last man while inflicting over 77,000 casualties on the Allies.
And definitely that has to be considered in the mindset. One of the things I often say is when we do talk about the idea of were the atomic bombs justified, the thing we can't do is look back with the knowledge we have today and say whether it was justified. The way I always look at it is, what was the information they had available to them? What was their thought process? What were they looking at? And that's what you have to consider when it comes to Truman, is he's looking at the evidence. He's looking at what happened on these islands like Okinawa and Iwo Jima and how desperately the Japanese fought. And then looking at a Japanese home island with millions of people, and look at the civilians even, how they responded. And so the consideration is, how do we end this war without having to fight probably for years on the home islands. That's what they're thinking with all of this.
The fighting in Burma has been equally savage. Now, the Allies have begun preparations for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan itself. However, many in Allied high command are appalled by the casualty estimates for the invasion, which range from 297,000 to over 1 million.
In either case, that would dwarf the number of casualties that have already taken place in the Pacific to this point. The vast majority of casualties in World War II would have happened in the invasion of Japan. Now, Japan by this point many of its cities have already been leveled by firebombing, okay? So while the atomic bomb is one bomb and does significant damage and kills a lot of civilians, it's hardly the first time that a lot of civilians have died in massive bombing raids on Japanese cities, and they show no signs of surrendering.
Fanatical kamikazes are expected to take a massive toll on the invaders, while the entirety of Japanese society will be mobilized to repel the attack. Upwards of 5 million Japanese citizens are expected to die in the invasion. With such a heavy cost associated with Operation Downfall, many, including new US President Harry Truman, have looked for other ways to end the war quickly without the need for an invasion.
Now that's a great point too, is it's not just Americans and other allies that are going to die in a potential invasion. It's a lot of Japanese people too. Millions, in fact, and that seems very likely.
The United States may just have a way. On the 13th of August 1942, the first offices of the Manhattan Engineering District opened at 270 Broadway in New York City. Under the command of General Leslie Groves, the Manhattan Project, as it came to be known, had one goal: the creation of the most powerful weapon ever.
And Leslie Groves, kind of interesting, he was hoping he was the guy kind of responsible for building the Pentagon as the headquarters for the United States military. And he was hoping after that project was completed that he might get some kind of a command closer to combat, something over in Africa or in the Pacific or just anything other than another stateside project.
Developing pre-war British nuclear research, under the supervision of General Groves and theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project grew to employ over 600,000 predominantly Americans, Britons and Canadians, working feverishly to harness the power of the atom.
Now, we're not here to get into all of the details of the Manhattan Project today, and we probably should do that at some point, but the sheer scale of this project to produce a couple of bombs. Now, granted, they knew that this was going to be producing more than a couple of bombs long term, but for the purposes of the war, right? 600,000 employees, the amount of resources that went into this, building entire new towns, cities really, complete with all the infrastructure that is needed for entire families to live on in these towns and cities. The amount of electricity and raw materials that were used for this project.
On the 16th of July 1945, the first atomic bomb is successfully tested in Trinity, New Mexico. Armed with this knowledge, Truman, along with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek, issue the Potsdam Declaration on the 26th of July 1945, calling for Japan to surrender unconditionally, or it will face prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese government ignores the ultimatum and continues to fight on. Desperate to avoid prolonging the war, Truman gives final approval to use the atomic bomb against a Japanese city on the 2nd of August.
So remember, Truman's been president for a couple months at this point. He was only vice president for a matter of weeks. He was not FDR's first vice president. He came to office in March. Oh no, I guess it was January by that point, in January of that year. So he's actually been vice president for 3 months at that point, because I think it was in the 1930s we went from March being the swear-in date to being January. He hasn't been in office long, and he didn't know anything about the details of this project until after he became president.
The day prior, the bomb, codenamed Little Boy, is fully assembled and ready for use. General Groves...
That's another great point. They fully assemble it. Right? Why? Because, well, you don't want to put the thing together and have it like all ready to go when you transport it. It's not armed yet, so it's probably safe. It's not like if you bombed it, anything would happen. And it's transported by the USS Indianapolis, which I think is a heavy cruiser. that'll very famously on the return trip be sunk. And that's a story for another day as well.
And a targeting committee have already narrowed down the list of potential targets to 4. The cities of Kokura, Nagasaki, Niigata, and Hiroshima, which have gone relatively unscathed by bombing so far in the war. An hour before Tibbets took off, 3 weather aircraft lifted off from Tinian to reconnoiter.
So why does that matter? Because they actually want to test how this bomb performs, right? So they're actually intentionally targeting cities that have been largely untouched because they want to see what it does.
The potential targets. Niigata has been ruled out due to weather concerns, leaving the 3 B-29s to report back on conditions over the other cities. Hiroshima and its over 300,000 inhabitants has already been chosen as the primary target, weather permitting. It is an industrial and transit hub for the enemy's war effort, while also serving as the headquarters of the Japanese Second Army. 43,000 Japanese troops are stationed in the city, which also boasts a large port. Furthermore, Hiroshima's flat topography will hopefully maximize the destructive potential of the bomb. A B-29 nicknamed Straight Flush is dispatched to the city to determine whether conditions are good enough for a bombing run. At 5:55 am Tinian time, Enola Gay arrives over the island of Iwo Jima and circles at 8,000 feet to wait for the 2 escorting superfortresses to catch up.
And this is actually one of the reasons why islands like Iwo Jima were taken in the first place, because it's a spot that gets you that much closer to Japan, but the range of the B-29s makes it unnecessary in terms of needing it to get closer to Japan, but it becomes a place that you can launch fighters from. Again, probably can't reach that far, but it also becomes a place that you can access emergency services if needed. So if you got a B-29 that's on its way back from Japan and it's been damaged in a bombing run by enemy fighters or enemy defenses, but it can't make it all the way back to a place like Tinian, it can land at Iwo Jima.
Each aircraft has a critical role to play in the mission. Enola Gay will deliver the weapon, while the Great Artiste, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, is carrying blast measurement instrumentation to measure the yield of the explosion.
Remember, this isn't just a military operation, it is in some ways a scientific operation as well.
Evil, piloted by Captain George Marquardt, will observe and photograph the results of the mission. When all 3 aircraft have rendezvoused over Iwo Jima, the superfortresses continue towards Japan while awaiting the weather report. An hour and 20 minutes later, at 7:15 am, Second Lieutenant Maurice Jepson climbs into the Enola Gay's bomb bay and pulls 3 green safety plugs out of the bomb, which had been put there to prevent stray electrical current from prematurely detonating the weapon. He replaces the plugs with new red ones to arm the bomb before informing Colonel Tibbets that Little Boy is ready to use. Tibbets pressurizes the aircraft and begins a slow climb to 32,700 feet, while the crew put on parachutes and flak suits. All 3 reconnaissance aircraft arrive over their targets precisely at 8:09 am. Straight Flush is the first to report back 15 minutes later, sending a coded message to the Enola Gay, which reads, "Cloud cover less than 3/10 at all altitudes. Advice, bomb primary." Tibbets once again turns on the intercom and informs his crew, it's Hiroshima. A one-word message is sent back to the squadron security chief on Iwo Jima, primary.
Now, the same thing will not happen in the second bombing, the Fat Man bombing. Their primary target is not going to be available.
Japanese defences in the city sound an air raid warning, but the residents on the ground are hardly concerned about a single B-29. American aircraft have overflown the city plenty of times without attacking. The warning is lifted soon after, and life in Hiroshima goes on as normal. At 9:05 am, the Enola Gay's navigator, Major Theodore Van Kirk, informs Colonel Tibbets that they are 10 minutes from the target. The aircraft is flying at 31,060 feet when the city comes into view, and Tibbets prepares for his bombing run. Cloud cover is at just 10%, far better than the minimum of 30% visibility required for the mission. At 9:12 am, control over the aircraft is handed over to the bombardier, Major Thomas Farabee, and Tibbets orders his crew to don dark Polaroid glasses to protect their eyes from the flash of the explosion. A radio
So you have to
Hiroshima...
put yourself in the mindset of one of these crew members, right? You haven't seen one of these bombs go off. Very few people have seen the one test that was done. You're only going on what you're being told, and you probably don't fully grasp exactly what this is. You're just dropping a single bomb. You've been told it's probably going to be big. I don't think any of them had a real understanding of what this was.
Operator reports 3 aircraft in the skies above the city, and another air raid warning goes out. However, the warning is too late to allow any interceptors to scramble, and Japanese anti-aircraft batteries cannot hit the superfortresses at such high altitude. The aiming point for the bomb, the Aioi Bridge, comes into view at 9:14 am. Farabee calls out, "I've got it." The bomber continues to advance on its target. Little Boy has been set to airburst over the Aioi Bridge in order to cause the most damage possible.
Yeah, this is important too. This isn't a contact bomb, right? It's not a bomb that when it has something on the front of it where when it hits, it explodes. It's going to burst in the air because that's going to cause, it's going to come down first, and that's going to cause all of that pressure and all of that damage to be maximized from the air.
58 seconds later, he shouts, "Bomb away," and the 9,700-pound Little Boy atomic bomb drops free from the bomb bay doors.
That's another really good point there. Look at how far back from the target they are when they release, right? Because momentum is going to carry it forward. It's not that they get over the target, they drop it, and it goes straight down.
It immediately throws the B-29 into a 155-degree hard turn to get away from the blast zone as quickly as possible. At the same time, escorting B-29, the Great Artiste drops instrument-bearing parachutes which will measure the impact of the explosion before also turning away. On the ground, Hiroshima's streets are packed with early morning rush hour traffic, and its residents have no idea of the impending catastrophe about to befall them. In the preceding days, American aircraft had dropped leaflets warning civilians to evacuate the city, but these are mostly ignored. An internal radar system tracks the bomb's descent as it plummets to Earth, travelling over 5 miles from the release point. At 1,968 feet above the ground, the radar altimeter and barometric sensors initiate the detonation.
Just like that. Wow. That was a cool animation, by the way.
A gun primer launches a hollow uranium projectile at 980 feet per second into a uranium mass, causing a supercritical chain reaction that achieves nuclear fission in 0.15 microseconds.
And the amount of uranium that was used to make this bomb took years to develop. And it's a whole long, fascinating story in and of itself about how they collected this uranium. And that's why the second bomb is going to be plutonium, because it was much easier to come by. The test bomb had been plutonium. The second bomb's plutonium. They really only had enough uranium ready to go for one bomb.
After 43 seconds of falling through the air, at 8:16 am and 2 seconds Hiroshima time, the bomb explodes. After just 1 second, a 277,000 degree centigrade fireball, measuring 900 feet in diameter, instantly incinerates any human or animal caught outside near ground zero.
That's the one good thing about this, if there is a good thing at all, is that if you, at least for the people who were super close, they never even knew what hit them. I mean, that level of temperature just turns to ash anything, any human at all. And that's really, if you're going to be a victim of this bomb, that's the place to be, is as close to ground zero as possible, to where you just disappear in an instant. The people who are a little further out, who deal with radiation, all that stuff, much, much worse.
Bronze statues, roof tiles, and even granite stones melt in the intense heat. A shockwave travelling at 984 miles per hour demolishes tens of thousands of buildings
faster
in the blink
than
of
the speed
an
of
eye,
sound.
while multiple firestorms erupt instantly throughout the city. 80,000 people are killed in mere seconds. Aboard the Enola Gay, Technical Sergeant George Caron is in the tail gunner position when the bomb explodes. He can see with his own eyes the shockwave approaching the aircraft and yells out a warning. The shockwave buffets the superfortress, followed seconds later by another one. Caron snaps the only official photographs of the explosion, while describing what he sees to Colonel Tibbets. A column of smoke rising fast, with a fiery red core. A bubbling mass, purple-grey in colour, like a mass of bubbling molasses. The mushroom is spreading out. It's maybe a mile or two wide and a half a mile high. He would later characterise what he saw as a peep into hell. The Enola Gay sends a message back to Tinian. Clear-cut, successful in all aspects. Conditions normal in airplane following delivery. Proceeding to base.
Now, that might sound heartless, but you got to remember, this is a military operation, dropping a weapon on what in their minds is a military target. They're doing a job, and they have a job to do. Even after this, they have to report back what they see. They have to give the facts. There's not really time or the ability to process the human cost of this, right? This is hardly, for many of these guys, the first time that they've dropped bombs that have killed people. It's just a much, much bigger scale.
Their mission complete, all 3 aircraft begin the long journey back to the Marianas, while what is left of Hiroshima continues to burn. Hours after the destruction of Hiroshima, President Truman issues a statement announcing the use of the atomic bomb. He concludes his speech by giving Japan another ultimatum. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
And you can see that speech. You can watch it on YouTube. Just go look it up. But remember, this bomb is as much about propaganda as it is about anything militarily, right? This is meant to send a message to Japan to try and get them to surrender. It's not about just strictly destroying military targets.
In Tokyo, the Japanese cabinet meets on the 8th of August and debates whether to surrender. Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori suggests that they should accept the terms of the Potsdam Declaration, but the cabinet cannot come to a unanimous decision. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki proclaims that the war will go on, but the Foreign Minister asks Japan's ambassador to the Soviet Union to persuade the Soviets to mediate negotiations. Instead, the ambassador is informed by Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov that the USSR is now in a state of war with Japan, effective the next day.
This was also something that was agreed to with the other allies. The agreement was that I think 3 months after the end of the war against Germany, that the Soviet Union would enter the war against Japan. And pretty much almost to the day, they do that. And this is where it gets tricky, right? Because of the timing of the Soviet invasion of Manchuria and their entrance into the war against Japan, how much of Japan's decision to surrender is about the bombs, and how much is it about the entrance of the Soviet Union into the war? Is it both? Is one more important than the other?
On the 9th of August, Soviet forces invade Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Meanwhile, a second atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, is ready for use. With no sign from the Japanese government, the decision has been made to attack another city. This time, the primary target will be Kokura, and the secondary will be Nagasaki.
Now, what Japan and others obviously don't know at this point is that the U.S. doesn't have an unlimited supply of these bombs. They are in the process of making a third one. But it would have been these are only a couple days apart, right? It would have been a couple more weeks before the third one was ready to deploy. So they're kind of hedging their bets here that this second one's going to do the trick, and it's going to be enough to send that message.
The mission begins similarly to the attack on Hiroshima, as 2 weather reconnaissance B-29s are sent to scout the targets early in the morning. Enola Gay is back in the air to gauge conditions over Kokura, while Major Charles Sweeney will pilot the delivery aircraft, a B-29 named Boxcar. However, during pre-flight checks it had been discovered that the fuel pump for one of the reserve tanks had malfunctioned, which significantly cut the amount of time the B-29 can remain in the air. After a short discussion, the decision was made to continue with the mission. At 3:47 am, Boxcar and its support aircraft, the Great Artiste and Big Stink, lifted off from Tinian and made their way towards the rendezvous point at Yakushima Island. Unlike the mission 3 days prior, this operation is far from smooth. 2 hours into the flight, a red warning light on Fat Man's fuse monitor unexpectedly starts flashing, which indicates that some of the bomb's fuses have been activated.
That is not what you want to hear when you're carrying one of those bombs.
Fearing the bomb is about to detonate on its own, weaponeer Frederick Ashworth goes to investigate and discovers that ground technicians accidentally misaligned 2 circuit switches. Ashworth quickly solves the issue, and every man on the aircraft breathes a sigh of relief. When Boxcar arrives at Yakushima Island at 9:10 am, the Great Artiste soon joins, but not the Big Stink. Despite being told to wait no longer than 15 minutes, Major Sweeney circles for 40 minutes, awaiting the final B-29. However, the Big Stink has got lost in dense clouds and will not make it to the rendezvous point. After receiving word from the Enola Gay that weather above Kokura offers enough visibility for a bomb run, Sweeney decides to proceed with the mission and sets course for Kokura at 9:50 am. Fat Man is armed, and the crew prepares themselves for the climactic moment ahead. Meanwhile,
think about this. This is how close they came to dropping this bomb on the primary target of Kokura instead of on Nagasaki. They were making their run.
Conditions begin to deteriorate over Kokura just as Enola Gay has left the area. Worse yet, Japanese defences are put on alert after the departure of the weather aircraft, which will make the mission even more difficult. Boxcar and the Great Artiste arrive over Kokura at 10:44 to find the city shrouded in clouds and dark smoke. The aircraft initiate a bombing run, but the bombardier, Captain Kermit K. Bien, reports to Sweeney that he can't find the aim point through the clouds and smoke. Sweeney has been strictly ordered to bomb visually rather than using unreliable radar guidance, so the placement can be as close to the target as possible. Both aircraft break off the bombing run and try again, but Bien...
And you're a Japanese soldier or civilian in Kokura, you owe your life in that moment to the thickness of the clouds.
Again can't find the aim point. Smoke from an American firebombing attack on the nearby city of Yawata is obscuring the target, and the Japanese industrial factories in the area are producing thick black smoke. The commander of the USAAF's 21st Bomber Command, Major General Curtis LeMay, has escalated the firebombing of Japanese cities following the attack on Hiroshima. Although the renewed strategic bombing campaign is intended to bludgeon the enemy into surrendering, it is now working against this mission.
Yeah, because remember, what did Truman say? We're going to bring a rain of ruin from the air, the likes of which have never been seen. So that's not just about the atomic bombs, that's about the continued firebombing campaign as well.
Third run, Boxcar is running out of fuel after spending 45 minutes above Kokura, and enemy fighters have been detected on radar. The third run also fails, and Sweeney has a decision to make. If he continues waiting for conditions to improve over Kokura, he risks a run-in with Japanese interceptors. He could cancel the mission and make an emergency landing on Okinawa with Fat Man still aboard, or he could continue to the secondary target of Nagasaki, which is 95 miles away. At 11:32 am, Sweeney decides to make for Nagasaki, along with the Great Artiste. The city of Kokura has been spared from the destruction thanks in part to the delay over Yakushima Island, spawning the Japanese expression Kokura luck to describe the lucky avoidance of great misfortune. Now it is Nagasaki which is in danger.
Not so lucky.
The city of Nagasaki is one of the most important industrial centres in the Japanese Empire. 2 Mitsubishi factories operate within the city limits, including the Mitsubishi torpedo plant, which mass produces the potent Long Lance torpedo. Additionally, the city of 286,000 people is home to a major port area with shipyards vital to the Japanese war effort. It takes just 34 minutes for the superfortresses to arrive at Nagasaki, but Major Sweeney is disappointed to see that weather conditions have also deteriorated here. After deliberating with the crew for 2 minutes, Sweeney decides to make one pass over the target. If Bombardier Bien fails to locate the target, the bombing will be aborted. At 11:58 am, Boxcar begins its final bombing run. At this precise moment, the Japanese Imperial Supreme War Council is meeting in Tokyo to discuss a conditional surrender to the Allies. The cloud cover is still too thick over Nagasaki, forcing Captain Bien to navigate using radar. He scans the city through the bomb site before spotting a small break in the clouds 2 miles north of the ideal aim point. Knowing it's now or never, Bien calls out, "Bombs away," before immediately correcting himself, "Bomb away."
Bomb away. Yeah, that's not something he's used to saying, right? Usually it's a whole bunch of bombs. And so going up further from the target means they're up closer to the mountains, and it's going to have an impact on what the bomb does. But breaking the clouds, it's those kinds of little things that this stuff hinges on.
Fat Man falls free, and Boxcar along with the great artiste flee from the target. Unlike Little Boy, which was an enriched uranium gun-fired weapon, Fat Man is a plutonium implosion bomb. After falling...
One of the things, if you've ever seen any documentaries on the Manhattan Project, is one of the things they're trying to figure out is how to make a plutonium bomb work, and it takes a lot of months and months of work to figure out a way to cause implosion in such a way that it will lead to the desired effect of imploding and then causing that to release all that energy.
For 43 seconds, the barometric sensors inside the bomb trigger the fission process. Detonators on the surface of a sphere of high explosives are fired simultaneously to produce inward pressure on a subcritical mass of plutonium, releasing a massive amount of energy. At 11:02 Nagasaki time, the bomb detonates at an altitude of about 1,650 feet in a small valley within the city limits. The blast razes much of the area to the ground in seconds, killing approximately 40,000 people instantly. 3 shockwaves radiate out from the hypocenter, jolting Boxcar and the Great Artiste, which are flying south towards Okinawa. Since the bomb has exploded in a valley, much of Nagasaki has been shielded from the worst effects of the blast, in contrast to the flat plain of Hiroshima. However, 44% of the city has been destroyed in the attack. 28 minutes later, the Japanese War Cabinet in Tokyo receives word that another atomic bomb has hit Nagasaki. Despite losing 2 engines to fuel starvation, Boxcar will make a successful emergency landing at Okinawa before returning to Tinian later that night. The Imperial War Council is stunned by the twin shocks of the Soviet declaration of war and the attack on Nagasaki.
And see, I think in the end, that's how we have to consider this, is that it's not either or. We can play what if and say, well, if the bombs hadn't been dropped, would the Soviet Union invading have been enough? And if the bombs had been dropped but the Soviets hadn't invaded, would that have been enough? I think it's a combination of the two. It's all happening at one time, and it's enough to put pressure on the emperor to say, we've got to end this.
The realization that the United States has built up a stockpile of nuclear weapons has a powerful impact on many in the Japanese cabinet. President Truman announces the bombing to the American public and concludes his statement by threatening to use the bomb again. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war. Only a Japanese surrender will stop us. 5 days of tortuous negotiations proceed, in which the Imperial War Council goes back and forth on whether to accept the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. Finally, on the 14th of August, Emperor Hirohito announces to his cabinet that the war must end. "I do not wish my people to fall into deeper distress or destroy our culture," he tells.
And it had to come from him, I think. And that's just the way it was. There's nearly a coup anyway, but they're able to win the day.
The time has come when we must bear the unbearable. Later that day, fanatical officers attempt a coup to stop the surrender, but their efforts fail. On the 15th of August 1945, Emperor Hirohito addresses the nation over the radio to announce that Japan has surrendered. The Second World War is over. The attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki have changed warfare. The United States has obliterated 2 major cities with the most powerful weapon ever used. According to a 1975 investigative report by the United Nations Non-Governmental Organizations Committee, between 100,000 and 140,000 people are killed in Hiroshima, while another 70,000 are killed in Nagasaki. Over 150,000 have been wounded, and many will suffer from the effects of radiation sickness for the rest of their lives.
And radiation poisoning and sickness is nasty stuff, and then on top of that, you got to figure the number of people who end up developing lifelong diseases or cancer and die from that.
The vast majority of those who have perished are civilians. Colonel Paul Tibbets is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross after the bombings, and the 509th Composite Group will later be awarded an Air Force Outstanding Unit Award in 1999. The necessity and ethical responsibility of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki continues to be debated to this day.
That's one we'll have to probably dive into at some point. I think it's probably worth us having that conversation. And I'm glad that they've started this second channel to kind of go deeper into some of these topics while still giving the overview on this video. So I put that link in the description. I'll put some links to some of their other videos that I've done over time. Definitely check out my friend JD and his visit to Tinian, showing you where these planes actually took off from on their bombing runs. Great stuff. Really appreciate you checking it out. Thanks for watching.